Life on Earth has always fascinated us. How did it appear? How has it evolved over the past few billion years? How did we get here? Dear traveler, welcome. Today we're off on an incredible journey through time to prehistoric lands. But before we set off on a new adventure, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. Thank you, and have a great trip! The history of life on Earth is long and full of twists and turns. It's difficult to date precisely when life first appeared on Earth. But based on fossils found in sedimentary rocks, it would appear that the oldest traces of life on Earth date back 3.8 billion years. Minus 3.8 billion years is the age of the first prokaryotic cell fossils. At that time, the Earth was very different from what it is today. It was much warmer. Its surface temperature would have been between 40 and 80 degrees Celsius, or 104 and 176 degrees Fahrenheit, compared with only 15 degrees Celsius, or 59 degrees Fahrenheit today. Life was then exclusively aquatic, and would remain so for 3.4 billion years. Until around 600 million years ago, evidence of life on Earth remains scarce. And the few clues we have don't tell us much about the evolution of life. But one event is about to change that. Around 700 million years ago, the Earth was marked by a series of global glaciations. At the end of these glaciations, around 580 million years ago, the first multicellular fossil animals visible to the naked eye appeared. They are known as the Ediacara fauna, after the Australian deposit where they were first discovered. These multicellular fossils have been found all over the world, from Russia to Namibia to Canada. The oldest animal fossils found date back to 574 million years ago. Unicellular organisms are not considered animals, even though they are a form of life. The term animal is used to describe a more complex multicellular organism. However, recent discoveries have challenged these assumptions. According to one scientific study, the first animals actually date back 890 million years. The first known multicellular animals are sponges. Until recently, the oldest sponges were thought to date back 600 million years. But a study published in the journal Nature has turned our knowledge on its head. A surprising fossil has been discovered, the remains of a vermiform structure that belonged to a multicellular organism living on, in, and near stromatolites. Stromatolites were formed by the first living beings known to have developed on Earth 3.8 billion years ago. Yet the reefs in which these sponges developed date back 890 million years, more than 200 million years before the oldest traces of sponges found to date. For these very special fossils do indeed belong to sponges. These discoveries show two things. Firstly, these sponges would have survived the period of glaciation experienced by the Earth around 700 million years ago. Secondly, these sponges appeared before the amount of oxygen in the air increased significantly. The history of life on Earth is peppered with extraordinary anecdotes of this kind. Stories of evolution against all odds, of discoveries that shake up what we already know. We're going to plunge into the past to discover the prehistoric animal and plant species that succeeded one another and evolved to become the species that populate our planet today. Are you ready for this journey into prehistoric lands? To understand how terrestrial species evolved, we're going back in time to when life first appeared on Earth over 3 billion years ago. Today, there are at least 8 million species on Earth. Animals, plants, living organisms. Life takes many different forms and never ceases to amaze us. According to the most widely accepted scientific theory, these millions of species evolved from a common microorganism called the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. We'll come back to this later. Because before we get to know LUCA, we need to understand how life on Earth came about. When the Earth was formed some 4.5 billion years ago, it was inhospitable. It would take about 1 billion years of cooling and condensation before the Earth was fully covered with water, the prerequisite for the emergence of life as we know it. During the Hadean, a geological period that lasted between 4.5 and 4 billion years ago, there was no dry land, oceans, or lakes. It was during this period that the Earth's mass was formed. The core forms and the Moon appears, probably following an impact with a protoplanet. The Earth's crust begins to form and the Earth continues to cool. 4 billion years ago, at the end of the Hadean, the conditions necessary for the emergence of life on Earth were finally met. During the following period, the Archean, the first traces of life appear. By 3.9 billion years ago, the Earth's surface had cooled sufficiently to form a thin film on top of the still molten mantle. Under the action of intense volcanism, the Earth's crust continues to form. In very warm oceans, the first bacteria appear, cyanobacteria. Some cyanobacterial colonies are organized into microbial mats, forming large mineral structures known as stromatolites. Cyanobacteria are the first known living beings to have developed on Earth. These primitive unicellular organisms are at the origin of stromatolites, carbonate structures organized in superimposed layers and produced by their photosynthetic activity. They were the first organisms to possess the two photosystems that enabled them to photosynthesize. These prokaryotic organisms were to stimulate the development of biodiversity on Earth. Photosynthesis is at the origin of the Great Oxidation or Great Oxygenation, a major event that took place in the Paleoproterozoic era some 2.4 to 2 billion years ago. During this event, oxygen became a significant constituent of the atmosphere. It accumulated in water and soil. All living organisms had to adapt to these new conditions. Photosynthesis is also responsible for the formation of the ozone layer, which absorbs much of the sun's ultraviolet radiation. In this way, photosynthesis has also contributed to the development of life. The last common ancestor of all living beings, LUCA, is thought to have lived between 3.5 and 3.8 billion years ago. Unlikely as it may seem, Darwin discovered that all present-day living beings are cousins to varying degrees, despite enormous morphological and behavioral differences. These differences are simply the result of evolution. To find the last ancestor common to all living beings, scientists have compared the genes of one species with those of another. So what do we find that is identical between all living beings? We now know that living beings fall into three main groups: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. Archaea are similar to bacteria, but function differently. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, are quite different. This group includes all living beings whose cells have nuclei, including humans. In the history of evolution, the first groups to appear were bacteria and archaea. Eukaryotes appeared later, 1 or 2 billion years ago. Leuca would therefore be the ancestor of both bacteria and archaea. Let's go even further back to sketch the portrait of our common ancestor. Leuca is a single cell already capable of reproduction. Like plants, it feeds on chemical compounds. It has a membrane and genes. This cell is capable of using the same energy as our current cells. Leuca lives in warm water at a time when the Earth is dominated by the sea, dotted with a few volcanic islands. The air is thick, cloudy, and oxygen-free. Around 2.3 billion years ago, during the Great Oxygenation, cells initially isolated begin to aggregate in loose clusters, then in colonies. Gradually, they will form more sophisticated arrangements. In these arrangements, certain cells will differentiate and take on specific functions. These are the beginnings of animal life. We are now in the Proterozoic, a period that lasted from 2.5 billion years to 539 million years ago. Proterozoic means before the animal. During this period, the atmosphere became charged with oxygen from the oceans. The Earth cools rapidly. Around 1.5 billion years ago, the first eukaryotes appear. Algae diversified on the seabed, and the first multicellular animals appeared. The oceans were then populated by algae, sponges, jellyfish, and rare little shellfish measuring just a few millimeters. It was among eukaryotes that sexuality also began to appear, a source of major genetic innovations. Evolution then accelerated. But sexuality was not the only driver of evolution. If the first cells were able to become more complex, it was also thanks to the development of metabolic mechanisms capable of supplying large quantities of energy to the cells. These mechanisms rely on a fuel called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Primitive cells were able to capture this energy source, which was abundant in the primitive warm ocean environment. They then released ADP into the environment. After the Proterozoic came the Paleozoic, beginning with the Cambrian and the Shell Animal Revolution. The Paleozoic era lasted from 539 to 252 million years ago. This geological era, also known as the Primary Era, is divided into 6 periods: Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, and Permian. At the beginning of the Paleozoic era, a major evolution occurs. Small marine animals developed shells and skeletons. Thanks to this evolution, we have now been able to find numerous fossils of underwater animal species from this and subsequent periods. This is particularly true of major sites such as the Burgess Trench in Canada, where nearly 65,000 fossil specimens belonging to 120 different species have been found. Many specimens have been preserved thanks to their mineralized skeletons, enabling us to study them today. The Cambrian, between 539 and 485 million years ago, is an important period in the history of the evolution of life. Not only does it represent the beginning of the fossiliferous era, but it was also marked by an explosion in biodiversity with the appearance of numerous animal forms. This is known as the Cambrian explosion. This explosion of diversity certainly began before the Cambrian, but there are no fossils to prove it. Moreover, the first skeletons did not appear in the Cambrian. The first animals capable of biomineralization, i.e., producing mineral parts such as shells and skeletons, appeared a few million years before the Cambrian explosion. But they were very small, just a few millimeters in size, so they didn't leave any important fossils. In the Cambrian, life was still exclusively aquatic. The seas were warm and shallow, ideal for the development of life. They were populated by invertebrates, mollusks, sponges, worms, marine arthropods. The diversification of life that began in the Proterozoic accelerated. New species appeared, as did new anatomical forms, such as the external skeleton of arthropods or the articulated skeleton. Some animals developed genuine biological innovations, such as arthropods, whose appendages perform specific functions, such as walking, breathing, or chewing. In just 20 million years, a very short time for life, the first legs, fins, and claws appeared. Animal diversity reached a peak. The number of phyla is at least double that of today. The Cambrian explosion thus marks a real turning point in the evolutionary history of life on Earth. But why was there such an explosion of diversity at this point in Earth's history? According to scientists, several factors can explain the Cambrian explosion, starting with the high availability of certain important chemical elements, such as oxygen and calcium. But that's not all. By then, animals had recently acquired a genetic organization that enabled numerous anatomical combinations, leading, for example, to the appearance of legs and eyes. As for the shells and skeletons, they are certainly linked to massive coastal erosion. Erosion released chemical elements such as calcium, iron, potassium, and silica into the oceans. Animals learned to assimilate these elements to produce their shells and skeletons. Finally, a phenomenon of coevolution occurred, accelerating the diversification of species. As predators developed ways of adapting to the external skeletons of their prey, the latter developed new and increasingly effective means of defense to escape their predators. A bit like an arms race. When an organism invented a carapace, the predator had to find a way to pierce it, and vice versa. In the space of 50 million years, the face of underwater fauna has been completely reshaped. But what's happening on the surface? Has the diversity of Cambrian aquatic species spread to the surface? Not yet, but it won't be long. It was during the Paleozoic era that marine animals emerged from the waters to colonize dry land. The first species to reach land were plants. During the Ordovician period between 485 and 444 million years ago, animal life continued to diversify under the oceans. It spread from the seabed closer to the surface. Vertebrates and cephalopods now swim in open water. The first land plants colonized continental wetlands. They evolved from chlorophytic algae, including green algae. This evolution may have begun in the Cambrian or even earlier in the Proterozoic. Plants would then have lived in shallow freshwater. Gradually, they emerged from the water and developed features to adapt to their new environment, including tough walls to resist drying out. The earliest known traces of land plants are spores dating from the mid-Ordovician period. These are known as cryptospores. Their microstructure resembles that of modern liverworts. The complexification of organisms enabled these aquatic plants, which had become terrestrial, to develop an adaptation to a new, drier environment. Two approaches can be distinguished. Bryophyte plants restrict their habitat to moist environments. During periods of dryness, they halt their metabolism until the water returns. Tracheophytic plants, on the other hand, have an impermeable outer cuticle to reduce water loss. They also have small openings for gas exchange called stomata, and vascular tissues that facilitate the movement of liquids within the organism. These impressive innovations have provided the basis for the diversification of land plants. At the end of the Ordovician period, the Earth experienced its first major biodiversity crisis, the Ordovician Silurian extinction. It was probably caused by an episode of glaciation. During this crisis, 60 to 70% of the species present disappeared. In the Silurian period between 444 and 419 million years ago, animals followed the lead of plants and colonized dry land. In the oceans, arthropods and marine vertebrates proliferated and continued to diversify. The same applies to terrestrial plants in continental wetlands. The Silurians saw the appearance of vascular plants which have stems and sap. The vascular tissue allows water and mineral salts from the soil to circulate throughout the plant, as well as nutrients elaborated in the leaves. Soon the first ferns appear. It was also during the Silurian period that the first animals made their way onto dry land. Wetlands were soon populated by arthropods. Arthropods and invertebrates with a rigid carapace or cuticle, and a body divided into segments, each with a pair of jointed legs. Among the first arthropods to make the leap out of the water are myriapods or millipedes, and arachnids such as spiders, scorpions, and mites. When they arrived on the continents, these first animal settlers encountered a rather hostile environment. The environmental conditions of terrestrial wetlands are harsher and less stable than those of fluvial or marine environments. Like plants before them, arthropods had to develop new characteristics to adapt to these new environments. While plants develop arborescence, roots, and seed production, animals will adapt their respiration and reproduction mechanisms out of the water. They will also have to adapt to exposure to ultraviolet rays. Arthropods will soon be joined by hexapods or insects. Hexapods are a sub-branch of arthropods. They too colonized the continents at the beginning of the Devonian period, around 410 million years ago. Throughout the Devonian period, until 359 million years ago, life under the sea and on the continents underwent significant development. In the oceans, marine vertebrates were highly diversified. Placoderms, or armored fish, abounded. Tetrapods soon appeared. These were the first animals with legs and fingers. They could move around in shallow aquatic environments, but were not yet able to walk on land. On the continents, the first trees appeared during the Devonian. While vegetation at the beginning of the Devonian was only a few dozen centimeters high, it gradually gave way to forests of trees several tens of meters tall. The Archaeopteris is one of the oldest trees on our planet. This tree is halfway between a fern and a conifer. Its coniferous trunk is 1.5 meters wide, or 5 feet in diameter, and it can reach 40 meters or 130 feet in height. As a little anecdote, you'll certainly notice that the name of this tree bears a striking resemblance to Archaeopteryx, a flying dinosaur that appeared over 200 million years later, during the Jurassic period. Why this resemblance? Because, just as Archaeopteryx is an intermediate species between dinosaur and bird, Archaeopteris is an intermediate tree species between fern and conifer. The first complex terrestrial ecosystems were born, just in time to face a new biodiversity crisis, the Devonian extinction. This crisis caused the disappearance of 70% of aquatic species. It is thought to have been caused by major climatic variations and a drop in sea oxygenation. It marks the transition to a new geological period, the Carboniferous. The Carboniferous lasts from around -359 to -300 million years. Tectonic movements create a single new supercontinent, Pangea. Pangea is surrounded by a single ocean, the Panthalassa, and contains an inland sea, the Paleothetis. On the single continent, then located at the South Pole, the weather is warm and humid, conditions that favor the development of lush forests. The erosion and opulence of the vegetation will lead to a drop in the level of CO2 in the air, and therefore a drop in the Earth's temperature. New types of trees will be able to develop: deciduous trees in temperate zones, and large coal-bearing forests all along the equator. All these forests constitute rich ecosystems, conducive to the diversification of small animals that have left the aquatic environment. Forest floors teem with millipedes, scorpions, and spiders. Tetrapod species leave the aquatic environment for good, and the first terrestrial amniotes appear. Winged insects diversified and soon reigned supreme in the Carboniferous rainforests. Small insects rubbed shoulders with giant insects, frightening predators of the rainforests. This giant dragonfly, named Meganeura is one of the most emblematic giant winged insects of the Carboniferous period. It had a wingspan of over 70 centimeters or 28 inches and weighed 150 grams. That's about the wingspan of a peregrine falcon. As you can see, this dragonfly has 4 large wings reinforced by ribs and 6 jointed legs covered with spines. These spines were probably used to hold on to prey, which it could swoop down on at 70 kilometers per hour or 44 miles per hour. Unlike today's dragonflies, it attacked in flight. It was therefore a formidable hunter, especially as its eyes could see 360 degrees. What did Meganeura feed on? All the small insects, arthropods, and tetrapods that swarmed the lush forests of the late Paleozoic. Cockroaches, bugs, cicadas, beetles, mosquitoes, wasps, termites, ants, small reptiles. Here's Arthropleura, another emblematic terrestrial animal of the Carboniferous and later Permian eras. It's a gigantic centipede that could grow to over 2.5 meters or 8 feet long and 50 centimeters or 20 inches wide. Unlike Meganeura it was probably a herbivore. But there's still room for doubt. It had a powerful jaw and 2 pincers that would have been very handy for attacking its prey. During the Carboniferous period, forest floors were also inhabited by arachnids such as Megarachne. As its name suggests, Megarachne is the largest spider ever to have existed on Earth. Whether this giant spider belonged to the class of arachnids or euryptids, the sea scorpions, is currently unclear. What we do know is that it could have measured 35 centimeters or 14 inches long and 60 centimeters or 24 inches wide between the upper legs. To give you an idea of what this represents, you need to know that the bird-eating Goliath tarantula, one of the biggest spiders in the world today, is only 30 centimeters or 12 inches long. One hypothesis is favored by scientists: high atmospheric oxygen levels. In fact, it was around 35% in the Carboniferous period, compared with 21% in our own time. This high oxygen level is the result of trees replenishing the oxygen reserves depleted by the Devonian extinction. Spiders and insects need a lot of oxygen to grow. This hypothesis may explain the disappearance of giant insects like Megarachne and Arthropleura, which went extinct with the depletion of forests and the fall in atmospheric oxygen levels. But there are other hypotheses to explain this gigantism. These giant insects were at the top of the food chain. As long as food was plentiful and there were no other predators, they were able to flourish unhindered. But the arrival of vertebrates, then flying reptiles, changed all that. Competition became fiercer, and the giant insects eventually gave way to these new predators, better adapted to survival. A final hypothesis: the ecosystems in which giant dragonflies thrived were disrupted by the appearance of the precursors of flowering plants, leading to a reshuffling of the species evolving around lakes and ponds. Fungi are also found on Carboniferous forest soils. Fungi have co-evolved with plants and live in symbiosis with the plant world. They have played a major role in plant development. Without them, plants would have died for lack of essential minerals. Fungi extract organic and mineral nitrogen from the soil and return it to plants in the form of vitamins, antibiotics, or hormones. They transform phosphorus into organic phosphorus and produce amino acids. The first mushroom fossils date back some 1 billion years, but it's possible that they appeared long before that. Fungi would certainly have helped the first terrestrial plants to colonize land some 400 to 450 million years ago. The last period of the Paleozoic, the Permian, stretches from 300 to 252 million years ago. This teeming period marks the apogee of Paleozoic life. While the seas were dominated by the precursors of sharks, a complete change in flora took place on land. Conifers diversify, and seed plants become dominant. Seed plants date back 350 million years, but it was during the Permian period that they really came into their own. The development of seeds was an evolutionary response to the lack of water plants were facing. Seeds are resistant. They allow the plant embryo to wait for the most propitious moment to develop. The spread of seeds by wind and insects contributed to the rapid global development of seed plants across the entire continent. In terms of animal species, amniotes, four-legged vertebrates that lay eggs, diversified. Synapsids were the first amniotes to prosper. Among them was the Dimetrodon, whose name means two sizes of teeth. It can be recognized by the large sail of elongated neural spines on its back. This veil may have served as a thermoregulator or as an attribute during courtship. Like the Dimetrodon, the Adaphosaur had a dorsal sail. In the Permian, the first representatives of the sauropsids, to which dinosaurs, birds, and lizards belong, developed, having appeared at the end of the Carboniferous. In the Permian, sauropsids remain small and lizard-like. Aphylosaurus lutevensis is a small sauropsid, less than a meter long. It was one of the first species to use bipedalism. However, it was not 100% bipedal. The first completely bipedal vertebrate is certainly Eudabamus, a small sauropsid measuring 25 centimeters or 10 inches long. Its hind limbs were much longer and stronger than its front ones. Tetrapods also include Colerosauravus, a species of flying vertebrate that could glide thanks to its two large membranes and elongated flattened body. At the end of the Permian, the greatest crisis the Earth has ever known caused the disappearance of over 90% of marine and terrestrial species. While the precise details of this unprecedented crisis are not yet known, scientists believe that it was mainly caused by intense volcanic activity. From the center of present-day Siberia, volcanic eruptions followed one another for 1 million years. They released phenomenal quantities of lava. Scientists now estimate that lava thicknesses of up to 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet have been recorded in some areas. These eruptions also filled the atmosphere and oceans with toxic gases. Perhaps these gases fell back as acid rain. Whether this is the case or not, these eruptions have wreaked havoc. The Earth's temperature rose. Little by little, the oceans became deprived of oxygen. By the end of the Permian, sea level had fallen by 250 meters or 820 feet. Waters were shallow, stagnant, warm, and low in oxygen. Underwater life was threatened. Faced with such conditions, many species will not survive. 90% of marine species, 75% of vertebrates, and almost all primitive amphibians disappeared during this crisis, considered the deadliest in the Earth's history. The crisis marked the end of the Paleozoic and the transition to a new era, the Mesozoic. The Paleozoic saw the appearance of the first terrestrial species. Since sponges 890 million years ago, animals have diversified, first on the seabed, then on land. Plants may not be the first life forms to have left the oceans. Many living things are candidates for this title, starting with bacteria and archaea. Algae, fungi, and lichens may also have been among the first species to leave the waters. But all these species have one thing in common: they leave little or no fossil record. Animals took longer to leave the oceans. It took them 60 million years longer than plants to adapt to conditions on land. Numerous adaptations were required, whether to breathe out of water or to combat drought. Oxygen concentrations in gaseous air were thousands of times higher than in water. A completely new breathing apparatus had to be created for these conditions. They also had to develop a skin or carapace capable of protecting themselves from the sun's rays, which were no longer filtered by the sea. Animals that were able to survive were those that, like vascular plants, carried water within them. Some animals, such as the ancestors of today's seals and sea lions, were unable to adapt to the terrestrial environment, and so returned to the sea. The Permian-Triassic crisis at the end of the Paleozoic once again reshuffled the deck. We are now at the dawn of a new period of great diversification and biodiversity, the Mesozoic. The Mesozoic lasted almost 200 million years, between 252 and 66 million years ago. This period saw the emergence of dinosaurs, flying reptiles, and marine reptiles. As well as mammals and flowering plants. On the supercontinent Pangea, in the seas and oceans, life gradually rose from the ashes after the greatest mass extinction on Earth. Later, the breakup of Pangea would allow new faunas to develop on new continents and in new seas. The first Mesozoic period lasts around 50 million years, between 252 and 201 million years ago. This is the Triassic period. During this period, the reptile group diversified greatly, both on land and in the seas. This diversification earned the Mesozoic the nickname of the Age of Reptiles, although of course other species also emerged during these 200 million years or so. At the beginning of the Triassic, the Earth was devastated. Today we can see the marks of the catastrophe that caused the Permian-Triassic mass extinction, the Siberian traps, piles of solidified basaltic lava. These traps show that up to 4 million cubic kilometers of lava flowed over Siberia at this time. The Earth's temperature is still high, 19 degrees Celsius or 66 degrees Fahrenheit. The ice caps have disappeared. The climate is mostly hot and dry. Vegetation has withstood the crisis relatively well, and the landscape changes that began at the end of the Carboniferous will continue. In the Paleozoic, plants were mainly broad-leaved and reproduced with free spores like ferns. In the Mesozoic, the landscape is dominated by plants that reproduce mainly with ovules such as conifers, ginkgos, cycas, and tree ferns. These plants have smaller, leathery leaves, which are better adapted to arid environments. As for the animals, life gradually returned to normal. Some species have survived. Others will take advantage of the ecological niches left vacant to develop. The species that survived the Permian-Triassic crisis were those that were less specialized. They are more capable of adapting to a changing environment. Omnivores, for example, were able to change their diet more easily than carnivores, who faced the extinction of the species they fed on. Similarly, small animals survived more easily than large ones because their needs were less stringent. On the single continent, synapsids or mammalian reptiles are among the survivors. Among them, the therapsids comprise the ancestral lineages of today's mammals. Diconodonts are among the few therapsids to have survived the crisis. These tusked herbivores dominated the Triassic period. They quickly became the most diverse group of non-mammalian therapsids, with over 70 known genera. Depending on the species, they range in size from rats to elephants. Cyanodonts, the ancestors of the first mammals, emerged at the end of the Permian around 260 million years ago. Like Diconodonts, they are among the few therapsids to have survived the Permian-Triassic crisis. Their appearance is different from that of Diconodonts. Their teeth are similar to those of today's dogs. They are small in size and covered in fur. In the Triassic, they recolonized the ecological niches left vacant by the Gorgonopsians, carnivorous therapsids that had disappeared during the crisis. They will then diversify into several lineages of herbivores and carnivores. This is just one example of the major diversification that took place in the Triassic period. Within 10 million years, biodiversity had returned to pre-crisis levels. New specialized species appeared and colonized extremely varied environments. This is known as evolutionary radiation. Typical Paleozoic insects such as the giant dragonfly Meganeura gave way to metamorphosing insects like wasps, bees, and flies. Certain insects already present, such as beetles, will diversify. Reptiles are also taking advantage of the upheaval caused by the crisis to diversify. In the sea and in the air, they are everywhere and reign supreme. The Archosaur group diversified considerably, giving rise to crocodilian and flying reptiles such as pterosaurs, but also to dinosaurs. Dinosaurs literally mean terrible lizards. The earliest known traces of dinosaurs from South American fossils show us that they were bipedal predators with vertical limbs, more mobile than crocodilians, which are quadrupedal with lateral limbs. They were better able to stalk their prey and escape predators. They also have a warm-blooded metabolism, making them more active than cold-blooded reptiles. All this explains their considerable and rapid expansion from the middle of the Triassic. Eoraptor is one of the oldest known dinosaurs. Its name means thief of the dawn. It lived in Argentina during the Upper Triassic, between 230 and 225 million years ago. Like all other dinosaurs of its time, it is small in size. It is 1 meter or 3 feet long, 40 centimeters or 16 inches high, and weighs around 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. And yet, it belongs to the sauropodomorph group, like the titanosaurs, very large, long-necked Jurassic dinosaurs. Eoraptor probably feeds on small animals, leaves, and fruit. It can leap quickly at its prey and easily pick up plants with its long claws. Around 230 million years ago in the Upper Triassic, the two great lineages of ornithischians and saurischians were already formed. Several dinosaur species cohabit. Long considered the oldest known dinosaur, Herrerasaurus is a carnivorous dinosaur related to the theropods. It was bipedal and taller than the Eoraptor, measuring up to 5 meters or 16 feet. A formidable predator, it can prey on virtually any vertebrate, especially diconodonts. Its curved jaws and teeth enable it to easily tear the flesh of its prey. Platysaurs are herbivorous, sauropodomorph dinosaurs that also appeared in the Upper Triassic, around 214 million years ago. Its name means flat lizard. It is 8 meters long and weighs 4 tons. It walks on all fours but can also run on 2 legs. It has a large neck, an elongated body, and a small head. Its strong, robust limbs and long tail are equipped with powerful muscles. Mostly herbivorous, it feeds on plants 4 or 13 meters above the ground, such as cycads and araucarias, but it may occasionally eat meat. Many reptiles return to the sea, taking advantage of ecological niches vacated by placoderms, armored fish with powerful jaws that were formidable predators in the Paleozoic. They gave rise to new fearsome predators, the ichthyosaurs and sauropterygians. On Earth, the new great predators are the pterosaurs. These flying archosaurs appeared around 230 million years ago. They diversified over a period of more than 160 million years before becoming completely extinct around 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous. They are neither dinosaurs nor birds. Rather, they are classified as flying vertebrates. According to the fossil record, their distribution was worldwide. They occupied the ecological niches now occupied by birds and bats. While some pterosaurs measured no more than the size of a sparrow, others could exceed 10 meters or 33 feet wingspan. The first pterosaurs, which lived during the Triassic period, were small, no more than 2 meters for the largest specimens. They fed mainly on insects, fish, and other small prey. They had long tails and 5-toed legs. Their wings extended from the arm to the 4th finger of the hand, which was very elongated. At the end of the Triassic period, the movement of tectonic plates fractured the oceanic crust from east to west. Pangea was separated into 2 blocks, Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. Another mass extinction occurred, the Triassic-Jurassic crisis. This crisis spanned almost 17 million years, a record compared with previous crises that lasted only 1 to 2 million years. 70 to 80% of species disappeared. This crisis left the way clear for the dinosaurs, which thrived during the next period, the Jurassic. The Jurassic extended from 101 to 145 million years ago. This period saw the diversification of dinosaurs and insects, as well as the appearance of the first birds. Pangea no longer exists. The continents continue to break up, creating changes in ocean currents. This has an impact on climate. The climate is warmer and wetter than in the Triassic period, with alternating hot and cold episodes. Under the seas, animals took advantage of the opening of the sea lanes to disperse over the entire surface of the globe. But for land animals, the opposite is true. With the breakup of Pangea, they came up against new geographical barriers. Marine and terrestrial animals will evolve differently. Marine animals become cosmopolitan, while land animals develop specific characteristics from one region to another. On the continents, the Jurassic landscape is similar to that of the Triassic. Large forests of egg-bearing plants, or gymnosperms, develop. Conifers are still dominant. They grow alongside ginkgos, cycads, and also bennettitales, seed plants that have now disappeared. In the undergrowth, ferns and horsetails continue to play an important role. As for animals, dinosaurs diversified considerably and dominated many ecosystems. They develop very different morphologies, depending on the environment in which they evolved. They also increased in size. By the end of the Jurassic, almost all species showed a tendency towards gigantism. Carnivorous theropods and herbivorous sauropods often exceed 10 meters or 32 feet in length. Herbivores are the most impressive. Stegosaurus could measure up to 9 meters or 30 feet long, 4 meters or 13 feet high, and weigh up to 3 tons. It lived in North America in the present-day states of Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. It fed mainly on plants close to the ground. Slow, clumsy, and unable to run, it was vulnerable to predators despite its large size. Fortunately, it could defend itself with a tail bristling with 4 spikes up to 1 meter or 3 feet long. As you can see, he had bony plates on his back, arranged in a double row. These plates couldn't be used to defend itself, but they did help to regulate body temperature. Irrigated by blood vessels, they acted like solar panels, capturing the sun's heat to warm the dinosaur's blood. If, on the other hand, the dinosaur needed to cool down, he would shake the plates. Stegosaurus is huge, but ultimately quite small compared to the sauropod giants that lived at the same time. Brachiosaurus is one of the largest and heaviest animals the Earth has ever borne. It measured up to 30 meters or 100 feet and could weigh close to 80 tons. Like Diplodocus and Titanosaurus, it belongs to the sauropodomorph group. Although it was a herbivore, its large size could intimidate many a carnivorous predator. Its long neck enabled it to feed on leaves in the treetops like giraffes. Its head was 12 meters or 40 feet above the ground. Its forelimbs were longer than its hind limbs, hence its name meaning lizard with arms. Brachiosaurs evolved from an omnivorous, meat-eating dinosaur, but could also eat plants in times of famine. Another particularly interesting adaptation in the history of life on Earth. Carnivorous Jurassic dinosaurs are smaller than herbivores, but no less impressive and frightening. Their speed makes up for their relatively small size. These dinosaurs could join forces in packs to hunt other dinosaurs, especially herbivores, including larger ones. One of the largest Jurassic predators was the Allosaurus. Often confused with the Tyrannosaurus, it is a bipedal dinosaur found in North America, Africa, and Europe. It has enormous jaws, with crenulated curved teeth that enable it to tear off large chunks of flesh. Its long, powerful tail acts as a pendulum. Its forelimbs are short and sturdy, enabling it to easily butcher its prey. It feeds on herbivorous dinosaurs, but can also be a scavenger. Like many carnivorous dinosaurs, it can hunt in groups. Rarer than Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus was a bipedal carnivorous theropod dinosaur that lived in Colorado and Utah. Its name means horned lizard. It was the only carnivorous dinosaur to have a horn on its upper jaw. It could measure up to 6 meters or 20 feet long, 4 meters or 13 feet high, and weigh 800 kilograms or 1,800 pounds. Unlike the Allosaurus, this dinosaur was solitary by nature and rarely hunted in packs. Whereas the Allosaurus hunted huge prey such as Stegosaurus and Diplodocus, Ceratosaurus fed on small ornithopods and reptiles. Occasionally, it attacked herbivorous dinosaurs. Like Ceratosaurus, Compsognathus longipes fed on smaller animals, notably small mammals and insects. Fast and agile, this small carnivorous dinosaur is one of the fastest bipeds ever. Perhaps thanks to its thin, light bones and long hind limbs. It has long been considered the smallest dinosaur ever to have existed, at just 1 meter long, although fossils of even smaller dinosaurs have now been found. Compsognathus longipes lived in Europe at the end of the Jurassic period. The Jurassic saw the appearance of the first birds. Around 150 million years ago, Archaeopteryx was the first flying dinosaur. It was an avian dinosaur, the first in a line that gave rise to our modern birds. It was not the first dinosaur to cover itself with feathers. Some dinosaurs used them to regulate their body temperature or seduce their partners, but it is the first to be able to fly. According to researchers, Archaeopteryx doesn't flap its wings but spreads them like a butterfly swimmer. Towards the end of the Jurassic, the first pterosaurs gave way to descendants better adapted to flight. Their wings were better proportioned. They no longer had tails and they had 4-toed legs. This enabled them to thrive throughout the Cretaceous. Some pterosaur species could reach a wingspan of 10 meters or 32 feet. The Jurassic is also known as the Golden Age of insects. All the major insect groups of today already existed at this time. Each group was extremely diverse. For example, among the odonatates, damselflies and dragonflies, over 30 families were counted in the Jurassic. Unlike dinosaurs, insects began to shrink in size at the end of the Triassic. By the end of the Jurassic, the last giant insects had disappeared. Dinosaur feathers and mammal hair are a godsend for blood-feeding insects such as sandflies and mosquitoes. They take advantage of this to spread and diversify. Fleas also appear at this time. Like insects and unlike dinosaurs, mammals remained small during the Jurassic. The first mammals appeared in the Triassic. To cohabit with the fearsome dinosaurs, they had to keep a low profile, but that doesn't mean they weren't diverse. Most mammals are fur-covered. Some species are burrowers, meaning they dig burrows. Others are arboreal, they live in trees. They are diurnal and nocturnal mammals. Many mammals are insectivores, like the Agilocodon. This small tree-dwelling mammal, about the size of a shrew, lived in northern China. It measures around 13 centimeters or 5 inches from head to tail, and weighs 27 grams. It resembles a squirrel, with its elongated curved snout and horny claws. It was probably insectivorous, or even omnivorous. Its teeth probably enabled it to gnaw tree bark to consume the sap or gum. We are now at minus 145 million years. This marks the beginning of the Cretaceous, the last period of the Mesozoic era, which lasted until 66 million years ago. Pangea continues to break up. The South Atlantic appears. Australia and Antarctica are still united, as are Europe and North America. India broke away from Madagascar and began to drift towards northern Laurasia. The early Cretaceous experienced a cooling period, but this period was short-lived. Soon the Earth warms up. The climate becomes temperate to warm and humid. By the end of the Cretaceous, temperatures will be 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. There is no ice at the poles and the sea levels are high. In the late Cretaceous, it is 300 meters or 1,000 feet higher than sea level in 2023. There is also 5 times more CO2 in the atmosphere than today. These climatic changes opened up new ecological niches, leading to one of the major events of the Cretaceous, the diversification of flowering plants, the angiosperms. First appearing in the Jurassic, they really took off in the Cretaceous, spreading rapidly across the entire landmass. The conifers, ferns, and cycads that dominated the landscape in the Jurassic were soon replaced by shrubs, lianas, and herbaceous plants. Flowering plants demonstrated such a diversity of evolutionary adaptations that they still dominate terrestrial flora today. They developed hard fruits and cores to protect their embryos. They developed toxic molecules to protect themselves from certain animals, which eat their leaves and fruit. Their evolution is also linked to that of pollinating insects. Bees appeared around 100 million years ago. Butterflies, wasps, and other insects already present diversified. For example, butterflies develop nectar-sucking tubes instead of mandibles. The two species, angiosperms and pollinators, will help each other in their evolution. While pollinating insects gather the sweet nectar, or protein-rich pollen from flowering plants, the latter benefit from the dissemination of their seeds by these same insects. The revolution of flowering plants and the appearance of the first pollinators in the Cretaceous period are a major event in the formation of future ecosystems. As the environment became more complex, so did insect behavior. Eusocial insects such as ants and termites form colonies organized into complex societies, with castes and reproductive individuals. Others, like stick insects and certain dragonflies, develop mimicry strategies and camouflage themselves in their environment to escape predators. On the animal side, continents are still dominated by dinosaurs. As continents continue to break up, dinosaurs continue to diversify and specialize according to their environments. Tyrannosaurids are among the most emblematic carnivorous dinosaurs of this period. These carnivorous theropods lived in Asia and North America. Tyrannosaurus rex could reach 13 meters or 43 feet in length, 6 meters or 20 feet in height, and weighed 6 tons. It consists of 75 vertebrae, supporting a head measuring 1.40 meters or 5 feet. Its 58 sharp teeth, several dozen centimeters long, make it a formidable predator. Although it didn't run very fast, it could still travel at 20 kilometers per hour, or 12 miles per hour, enough speed to catch its prey. It fed on herbivorous dinosaurs such as hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, whose flagship species is the Triceratops. Occasionally it was a scavenger. Tyrannosaurus lived a very violent life and only lasted around 30 years, which is not very long for a predator of its size. Like the Tyrannosaurus rex, the Tarbosaurus is a member of the Tyrannosauridae family. It was just as frightening. In fact, its name means terrifying reptile. Like Tyrannosaurus rex, it was bipedal. It was slightly smaller than its cousin. It could measure 12 meters or 40 feet in length and weigh 5 tons. It preferred dead prey left behind by other predators. Like tyrannosaurids, carnivores were carnivorous superpredators. It didn't live in the same region as Tyrannosaurus and Tarbosaurus. They certainly never crossed paths. Tyrannosaurids lived in North America and Asia, while Abelosauridae, the Carnotaur family, lived in South America, India, and Europe. It measured 9 meters or 30 feet long and 3.50 meters or 11 feet high. Its name means carnivorous bull because of the 2 large horns on the top of its skull. Another emblematic Cretaceous dinosaur is the Triceratops from the Ceratopsian family. It can be recognized by its crest and horns. Unlike tyrannosaurids and carnivores, it was a herbivore. It lived in Laurasia and shared its territory with the tyrannosaur, of which it was a favorite prey. Also herbivores, titanosaurs are the only sauropsids of the Upper Cretaceous. Some species of titanosaur can measure up to 30 meters, like the Argentinosaurus, one of the largest dinosaurs ever discovered. As its name suggests, it lived mainly in Argentina. It could weigh between 80 and 95 tons. It was as tall as a 3-story building, and as long as 3 buses lined up, one behind the other. A vertebra of this dinosaur has been found, measuring the size of an adult human being. This gigantic dinosaur lived in herds. It had to migrate regularly to find food. In fact, its daily ration was equivalent to 400 kilograms or 250 pounds of vegetation. Among the herbivores of the Upper Cretaceous, we also find the ankylosaur, a placid, slow-moving herbivore that lived in North America. It could measure up to 10 meters or 33 feet in length, and 2 meters or 7 feet in height, weighing up to 4 tons. It is recognized by its club-shaped tail, which enabled it to defend itself from large predators. A veritable weapon, it could crush the bones of its assailants. Its weak point? Its legs, completely exposed as they were, not covered by a carapace like the rest of its body. When attacked, it would fold its legs under its body to protect them. In the Cretaceous, bird species continued to diversify. They had to share the sky with insects and huge flying reptiles like pterosaurs. But birds don't let themselves be intimidated. They are strong competition for pterosaurs, of which only a few species remain at the end of the Cretaceous, the largest of them all. Pteranodon has a wingspan of 7 meters or 23 feet, and Quetzalcoatlus up to 15 meters or 50 feet. Flowering plants provide a rich and varied food source for land animals: fruit, seeds, leaves, dead wood. Like insects and reptiles, mammals benefit from this food to diversify. As in the Jurassic, they are more discreet than the giant dinosaurs, but still present. A wide variety of mammals can be found: vegetarians, omnivores, insectivores, even carnivores such as Repanomamus robustus, which didn't hesitate to attack dinosaurs. The Cretaceous-Paleogene crisis represented a golden opportunity for mammals, causing the extinction of all non-avian dinosaurs. At the end of the Cretaceous 66 million years ago, a major biological crisis marked the end of the Mesozoic era. The cause was certainly a combination of factors: the fall of an asteroid, earthquakes, violent volcanic episodes releasing clouds of ash and dust, cooling off the atmosphere, marine regression. It's the last great biodiversity crisis, and also the best known. The Tertiary or Cenozoic era began 66 million years ago and continues to this day. This is the age of the mammals. These animals, which had kept a low profile throughout the Mesozoic, took advantage of the extinction of the giant dinosaurs to flourish. Like the dinosaurs before them, they rapidly evolved into large animals. The Cenozoic also saw the diversification of birds and flowering plants. The Paleogene, the first period of the Cenozoic, stretches from 66 to 23 million years ago. Many species disappeared during the Cretaceous-Paleogene crisis, leaving ecological niches vacant. The first species to benefit were flowering plants, particularly deciduous trees, which became the most diverse flora. Mammals and birds also took advantage of this event to diversify considerably. The evolutionary radiation of mammals produced most of today's orders. The Baluchithere, similar to a giant rhinoceros without horns, is the largest land mammal that has ever existed. We're not sure of its size, but it certainly measured over 7 meters or 23 feet in length, and weighed between 15 and 20 tons. Herbivorous, it lived in arid deserts and subtropical forests, where it grazed on leaves, shrubs, and herbaceous plants. In the Neogene, between 23 and 2.6 million years ago, the ecosystems of today were established. The Drake Current begins to flow around Antarctica. The planet gradually cooled and reached the climate we know today. The Isthmus of Panama closes, linking North and South America and separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Grasslands became commonplace. Terrestrial fauna had to adapt to new ecosystems similar to those that exist today. Mammals and birds continued to evolve. The first monkeys appeared around 20 million years ago. The Hylobatidae, which gave rise to the gibbons. The first hominids also appeared: Kenyapithecus in Africa and Gryphopithecus in Europe. Around 15 million years ago, the hominid family was subdivided into two subfamilies: the Pangines in Asia, of which only the orangutan remains today, and the hominins in Eurasia and Africa. We are entering a new period in the history of life, the Quaternary. The Quaternary began 2.6 million years ago with the appearance of man. The position of the continents is close to the present day. Our landscapes were shaped by 4 great ice ages, the last of which ended 10,000 years ago, separated by periods of climatic warming. The Great Lakes of northern Europe and North America appeared when the ice caps that covered them during these glaciations melted. At the beginning of the Quaternary, several species appeared that still exist today: cattle, horses, elephants. The Quaternary was also marked by the emergence of the Homo genus. The oldest human fossils date back 2.8 million years to Homo habilis. As for the oldest Homo sapiens, they date back 300,000 years. That's a very short time in geological time. If we were to scale the history of life on Earth to 1 year, the history of the human race would represent just 1 minute of that year. And yet, our lineage has had an unprecedented impact on flora and fauna. During the Quaternary, ice ages and the emergence of the human race led to the extinction of the majority of large mammal species, grouped under the term megafauna. Mammoths, giant North American beavers, giant sloths, Smilodon, Canis dirus. From 2 million years ago, these large predators were in competition with Homo ergaster, with its unprecedented hunting abilities. These large predators eventually disappeared for lack of prey to exploit. The history of life on Earth has seen many twists and turns. The first animal species were born under the oceans. Gradually, plants and then small animals left the waters to colonize the Earth. In the Paleozoic, the first land animals developed impressive evolutionary characteristics to adapt to their new environment. The Mesozoic was the age of reptiles, with the expansion of giant dinosaurs and the revolution of flowering plants. In the Cenozoic, after the extinction of the dinosaurs, we enter the era of the mammals. Like the dinosaurs before them, mammals flourished to impressive sizes. Before going any further, I think it's important to make a brief aside about mass extinctions. Biological crises such as the Ordovician-Silurian have occurred several times in Earth's history. Some are better known than others, such as the Cretaceous extinction of the dinosaurs, but they are far from the only ones. Life underwent 5 mass extinctions during the Phanerozoic, the eon that stretches from the beginning of the Cambrian, 541 million years ago, to the present day. The 2 most important crises divide this eon into 3 eras: the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. 2 mass extinctions occurred during the Paleozoic, at the end of the Ordovician, as just mentioned, and at the end of the Devonian. Contrary to what we sometimes hear, these crises were never brutal. They very often had multiple and combined origins, and these were spread over millions of years. When we talk about mass extinctions, we're talking about major crises. These are the ones we're generally most familiar with, because they have, of course, left their mark on the history of our planet. But that doesn't mean they're the only ones to have occurred. The history of living organisms has been punctuated by less severe crises. In fact, the Silurian had 3 minor extinctions that can be observed in the ocean. There was the so-called Erovican crisis, 433 million years ago, at the boundary between Llandovery and Wenlock, the Mold Crisis at the beginning of the Ludlow, and the Lau Crisis towards the end of the same period. For the first, scientists believed that the sea was anoxic, i.e., that the concentration of oxygen in the water dropped sharply. For the others, it's the ocean level that's mainly to blame. In 30,000 years, sea level would have risen by 16 meters. This is a very rapid change. Too rapid to give the species dependent on the impacted biotopes time to adapt and evolve accordingly. To conclude the chapter on geology and geography in the Silurian era, the most important thing to remember is that the Earth underwent considerable changes, notably the melting of the great ice formations, which had major repercussions on the environment and life. These repercussions are sometimes an unavoidable shock for the living world, but are also sometimes synonymous with renewal, diversity, and development. Fauna underwent a great upheaval following the mass extinction at the end of the Ordovician period. It was even fatal for a large number of species. However, other species managed to survive the extinction. This is the case for certain species, such as certain members of the trilobites. After the major biological crisis that hit our oceans, life is finally returning to normal. Of course, this process takes time. Biodiversity has been greatly weakened, and it will take tens of thousands of years to restore the balance. After the crisis, another event will shake things up a bit and give a little boost to the order of living things. A warmer climate will lead to the melting of certain ice caps and higher ocean temperatures. These elements will then be conducive to the development of tabulate corals, hexacoralliarids and tetracoralliarids, as well as algae and stromatopores. On the subject of stromatopores, until a few years ago they were classified as belonging to the order of corals. They were thought to be closely related to the millipore, the hydrocorallia. However, according to the latest findings from fossil analyses of these organisms, they are more likely to be classified as sponges. Each of these species, from corals to algae and sponges, contributes to the construction of large reefs, particularly on intertropical plateaus. We'll soon be taking a closer look at reefs. Let's stay on the surface for a moment. Even today, reefs are teeming with life and form one of the essential pillars of many marine ecosystems. In Silurian times, this was also the case for many organisms. Reefs were home to a large number of species, providing food for other animals higher up the food chain. Speaking of the food chain, there's another element besides the reef that we sometimes forget to mention when we think of ocean ecosystems: plankton. Despite its small size, it's a very important element. The food chain is one of the building blocks of an ecosystem. Everyone has a place and a role to play in this ecosystem. Whether predator or prey, each species counts for the survival of all. Today, as in the Silurian era, the base of the marine food chain is made up of plankton. In fact, during this third Paleozoic era, phytoplankton and zooplankton were already present in the vast ocean. For the record, phytoplankton are all unicellular organisms present in the surface waters of the ocean and using photosynthesis as a source of energy. Zooplankton are animal plankton that feed directly or indirectly on phytoplankton. The Silurian period saw the appearance of Ernochitina, Erna, and Fungochitina kosovensis, two marine plankton. In biology, they are known as chitinozoans. Like all marine species, phytoplankton and zooplankton were severely affected by the biological crisis at the end of the Silurian, but some have survived and even evolved. Until the beginning of the Ordovician period, graptolites belonged to the dendroid group, i.e. organisms with a planktonic lifestyle. But this was no longer the case. After undoubtedly passing through a pseudoplanktonic phase, a few million years later, they finally formed a class of colony-dwelling animals belonging to the Hemichordata phylum. Graptolites are rather strange colony-dwelling creatures floating in the water. These small marine organisms are colonial animals gathered around a main stem, with one individual serving as the central base, to which are attached small cells where each specimen lives. A real structure develops around it, forming a sort of living bell suspended in the water. But they can also cling to algae and form their colony around this attachment point if conditions require it for survival. Another important point to remember about graptolites is that they are stratigraphic. In other words, they enable us to situate sedimentary layers in time. The Llandovery period saw the appearance of Parachitograptus, Achaemanatus, and Achidograptus ascensus. During the Wenlock, Cirtograptus centrifugus marks the beginning of the period. This is followed by Neo-Diversograptus nilsoni in the Ludlow period and Monograptus perultimus in the Pridolian. In 2015, a study carried out on fossil plankton dating back some 415 million years unlocked a number of mysteries, including some of the causes of mass extinction. Paleontologists have also noted a high proportion of malformed, so-called teratological individuals in fossil phytoplankton and zooplankton in sedimentary layers dating from the Ordovician-Silurian period. These correspond to the initial stages of extinction events. After analysis, it turns out that these microorganisms contain a form of heavy metal pollution. Today, we know only too well the extent to which heavy metals have a negative impact on plankton. Scientists are well aware of the teratological effects of these metals. Toxins cause morphological abnormalities in aquatic organisms, and the presence of malformed individuals even serves as a tool for detecting possible contamination. Measurements of metal concentrations in some of these fossil specimens, as well as in the rocks surrounding them, reveal high concentrations of iron, lead, and arsenic. The abundance of these heavy metals in the fossils and rocks, combined with a high presence of teratological forms, suggests that the metals were absorbed by the organisms when they were alive and deposited in the surrounding sediments. While not the sole and principal cause of the major extinction, heavy metal pollution remains a contributing factor to the extinction phenomenon. Maybe it's time for us to go and meet some larger marine animals, don't you think? A few mollusks, some brachiopods, and many fish would like to testify to their history. What all these species have in common is the aquatic world. The fauna is almost exclusively marine, and in the end quite similar in all four corners of the globe. Some species settle in coastal regions, others prefer deeper waters. During the Ordovician period, we observed several species of mollusk. This large family continued to evolve during the Silurian, These, like the nautiloids, prefer coastal areas and shallow waters. Thanks to the sunlight penetrating the water, we should be able to see several fine specimens of these small marine organisms. I told you just now that many mollusks continued to evolve after the Ordovician during the Silurian. This means that a small handful did not. Not all nautiloids continued their development after the Ordovician. Giant nautiloids, for example, are less and less present in the Silurian. They survived the Ordovician, but during the Wenlock, the second period of the Silurian, they eventually became extinct, as in the case of the Camarasaurus genus. Other nautiloids diversified several million years ago, and the climatic and environmental conditions of the Silurian favored their development and diversification. Nautiloids include straight, curved, and even spiral shells. Not only did they survive the Ordovician crisis, but they also made it through the Cretaceous crisis unscathed, as the Nautilus and Allonautilus genera still exist today. Nautiloids belong to the tetrabranchial class of cephalopod mollusks, i.e. they have 4 gills. They live exclusively in open water. Nautiloid cephalopods have a distinctive shell. It spirals in a single plane. Inside there are several compartments, loges separated by partitions. The animal lives in the last compartment, called the living chamber. Although the animal only lives in one chamber, the other chambers are still useful. Each of these chambers contains a mixture of water and gas. Our little nautiloid is able to manage the volume of this mixture in the chambers thanks to the siphon that runs through them, allowing it to rise or fall deeper into the water. Most nautiloids are scavengers or opportunistic predators. In other words, they don't play hard to get and take what comes their way. During the previous period, the Ordovician, one nautiloid genus in particular had its heyday, Orthoceras. They were alpha predators, predators at the top of the food chain. But the giant Orthoceras will soon have to learn to be on its guard. Eurypterids made their grand entrance during the Silurian period. Here we see a Eurypterid, Achateuramus. It won't hesitate to attack the giant nautiloid if hunger strikes. But we'll have the chance to meet this new predator of the deep blue later on. In the Silurian, new genera of these cephalopods are also appearing, such as Pismoceras. Their shells are no longer completely planispiral, i.e. spiral-shaped on a single plane. The inner towers are detached from the outer towers. The Phragmoceras genus also boasts a rather singular morphology, with its shell shaped like a Phrygian cap. Phragmoceras, Eurystoma, and Phragmoceras dubium can be seen here. Phragmoceras is a nautiloid cephalopod mollusk with a distinctive curved shell in the shape of a Phrygian bonnet, rather than a coiled shell of today's nautilus, with almost 2 openings, one for the head and the other for the siphon. Among cephalopods, Actinoceratidae can also be found with a straight phragmocone. The phragmocone is the equivalent of the ostracum in other mollusks. It forms the partition part of the cephalopod shell. These mollusks have lived alongside other cephalopods, such as Ascoceratidae, Discoceratidae, Oncoceratidae, and Tarphoceratidae, whose spirally wound phragmocones are capable of floating. They also have a large siphon. Among the Discoricidae, it is interesting to observe one of the members of the genus, Gomphoceras. Unlike the other animals we saw, it too has a rather unusual shape. Most of the animal remains enclosed in the shell, leaving the tentacles and funnel to pass through. Its shape is convex and elongated, rather like a drop of water. Orthoceratidae can also be seen. They have a straight or slightly arched phragmocone. The siphon is narrow and variable in position, either straight or ringed. The cephalopods we've just discovered enjoy reefs and life in the shallow waters of our oceans, but so do brachiopods. Mollusks may be present, but brachiopods are in the majority and populate the Silurian oceans more widely. In a few million years' time, the balance will tip in the opposite direction. There will be fewer brachiopods and more mollusks during the Devonian. To give you an idea of this reversal, in the seas of the Primary Era, there were around 50 brachiopods for every bivalve. Today, there are far fewer brachiopods, with an estimated 1 brachiopod for every 50 bivalves. Brachiopods are marine animals that bear a striking resemblance to bivalves due to their two-valved shells. Without a little knowledge of the subject, they could easily be confused. In fact, these two groups are quite different in anatomy, and unlike bivalves, brachiopods are not mollusks. They are a group that belongs to the Lophophorians. This group also includes the Bryozoa and Phoronidia. Brachiopods are placed in the phylum Lophophorians because it is a phylum of invertebrates that possess a lophophore. A lophophore is a ciliated apparatus that plays both a feeding and a respiratory role. It is this common characteristic that brings the bryozoans we have mentioned and the brachiopods together in the same class. The Paleozoic is the golden age of brachiopods, as it was during this long period that they were the most numerous and diverse. Although we still have many brachiopod specimens in our seas, as we have just mentioned, they remain less numerous than they were millions of years ago. These marine animals have a benthic or sessile lifestyle, which means they live attached to the seabed. To better understand these small animals, it's important to know that a benthic lifestyle means that the organisms live attached to the ground or move by skimming the bottom. They find their food in the sediment and thus depend on it for their sustenance. A sessile lifestyle, on the other hand, defines a lifestyle in which the organism is permanently attached to the substrate, i.e. the soil where it grows or develops. This is the case, for example, of sponges and corals. There are two types of valve articulation, the main criteria for classifying this marine group: articulated brachiopods and inarticulated brachiopods. During the Silurian, articulated brachiopods diversified considerably. Unlike inarticulated brachiopods, the shells of articulated brachiopods remain fused even after the animal has died. Articulation is made possible by the presence of teeth on one valve, the peduncular valve, and dimples of complementary shapes on the other valve. Their two-valve shell is said to be asymmetrical and can be attached to the substrate. The larger valve is called the peduncular or ventral valve. The smaller one is commonly referred to as the dorsal or brachial valve. To attach itself, the brachiopod had a peduncle attached to an orifice called the foramen. At the commissure, the joint between the two shells, we can see a wavy shape running along the edges. It is precisely these small undulations that differentiate brachiopods from bivalves, where the commissure is smooth. Silurian brachiopods include Orthidae, Strophomenidae, Pentameridae, Rhynchonellidae, Spiriferidae, and Terbratullidae. The Strophomenidae are an order of articulated brachiopods that live from the lower Ordovician to the middle Carboniferous periods. They are part of the extinct class of Strophomenata, which was the largest known order of brachiopods, encompassing over 400 genera. All these small marine animals roam a rich seascape that supports the development of biodiversity. As you can see, this landscape is very varied in shallow waters. You can even see some very unusual animals. Sea lilies, also known as crinoids, populate Silurian oceans, as do scyphocrinites, elgans. Like sea urchins and starfish, they belong to the echinoderms. They first appeared in the Ordovician period, but expanded greatly in the Silurian. They still exist today. Because of their shape and name, they are often mistaken for sea flowers, but they are really limestone animals, not plants. Take a closer look at scyphocrinites elgans and you'll see what I mean. It has pinnules at the top of its articulated arms, a kind of small feather that enables it to capture plankton. The arms are grouped together and attached to the central part, the calyx, which itself rests on the stem. At the end of this stem, the sea lily has spikes. These hold it in place on the ground. Other similar animals have found their way to the seabed. Karyocrinites, for example, are also echinoderms, and they are expanding rapidly. Here you can see a Karyocrinites ornatus. These coral reefs have gradually become established, particularly in the Lapitous Ocean, between Proto-Gondwana and Laurasia. They have become the preferred home of the nautiloids we saw, as well as brachiopods. A little further on, we can see the famous Ordovician trilobites, which have diversified considerably since their appearance, a few million years ago. For all these little animals, these reefs at the bottom of the ocean could have been like paradise. But that was without counting on the arrival of a larger arthropod, the Eurypterid. Eurypterids are undoubtedly the most emblematic species of the period, and for good reason. The Silurian is known as the golden age of these sea scorpions. You have to imagine that these arthropods can reach absolutely extraordinary sizes, like this Eurypterid, Pterygotus. It is almost 2 meters long. During the Silurian period, it was the largest predator on the planet. No living organism rivals it in size or power. As a result, it quickly became a formidable predator, rising to the top of the food chain. More than 100 different species of Eurypterid are thought to have existed. They varied in size, but the largest specimens could reach between 2 meters 50 and 3 meters 60, or between 8 and 12 feet. This group includes Eurypterus, Megalograptus, and Pterygotus, which we have just seen. As we said earlier in our trip, the Eurypterid is a marine arthropod. Morphologically, it resembles a scorpion, hence its nickname sea scorpion. It is related to arachnids and crustaceans. Although closely related to the scorpion, the horseshoe crabs we still encounter today are their closest cousins. The Eurypterid belongs to the meristome group, like horseshoe crabs, and not to the arachnid group like scorpions. The Eurypterid is easy to identify. It can be recognized by its elongated body and large articulated tail. Its sting is visible at the end of the tail. However, unlike the scorpions we know today, it turns out that this sting contained no venom. At least that's what we know today. The Eurypterid also has a pair of fin-like legs and giant sharp pincers. These are highly efficient at cutting and crushing prey. While some species of this genus were undoubtedly opportunists, feeding on corpses found here and there on the ocean floor, other Eurypterids were fine predators. Their size was an asset, and to reach such dimensions, the environment and living conditions had to be right. At that time, oxygen levels were higher. Experiments have shown that the richer the oxygen content of the aquatic or terrestrial environment, the larger the insects, and in our case, the Eurypterati. As we just mentioned, Eurypterids were among the largest predators of their time, and quickly rose to the top of the chain. They hunted trilobites in deep water. Trilobites look a bit like aquatic sow-bugs. What applies to Eurypterids in terms of size also applies to trilobites. There were species as small as a few millimeters, but also some very large specimens. Some were as much as 75 centimeters or 30 inches long. So predators adapted to this type of morphology were needed. Their rigid dorsal carapace, rich in calcium carbonate, fossilized easily, hence their abundance in sediments. On the other hand, the underside and appendages are rarely preserved, and are known from only a dozen or so species. Eurypterids and trilobites have another thing in common. Like all arthropods, they grew throughout their lives by successive molts. If Eurypterids were formidable predators, it's because they were perfectly equipped to become the greatest marine predators of their time. Many marine animals with tails can only move them horizontally. In sea scorpions, the tail was virtually inflexible horizontally, but highly mobile vertically. According to the researchers, sea scorpions were thus able to bend their tails and project them far onto their targets. They would assault and kill their prey with lateral attacks using their toothed tails. This is what the recent study of a fossilized specimen, that of Slemonia acuminata, has revealed. Eurypterids have been numerous and highly diversified over the years, but they have also evolved. Soon, in the Carboniferous period in particular, Eurypterids such as Adelophthalmus pyrrhae were able to breathe in the open air, whereas until then they had been aquatic specimens. Their shells were also able to withstand atmospheric pressure in the open air. In other words, from time to time they might be able to get onto dry land without any difficulty at all. For now, we're going to continue our journey into the open sea to discover the many other species that inhabit the vast ocean. Yes, we haven't had time to meet any fish yet, but as you'll see, the history of this group during the Silurian period is full of twists and turns. Fish evolved a lot, especially at the end of the Silurian. But let's take a step back to better understand these changes. The first chordate organisms appeared in the Cambrian. It was from this chord that the vertebral column was derived, to which muscles could be attached, giving them greater mobility. During the Ordovician period, organisms such as Sacabambaspis, Arandaspis, Anastraspus developed an exoskeleton. This external carapace protected the anterior part of their body, leaving the posterior part flexible to facilitate movement of their only limb, their tail. They were thus the first craniites to appear. Crania are the clade of animals with a cartilaginous or bony skull, protecting the anterior part of the nervous system. They belong to the ostracoderms. With no lateral fins, they use only the power of their tails to navigate the ocean floor. The evolution of fish had pretty much come to a halt here at the end of the Ordovician period. Although there were a few outlines of evolution, they were mainly fixed and developed in the Silurian. Several groups of fossil vertebrates with mineralized skeletons but no jaws are known. These groups, also known as ostracoderms, are the Aranidaspids, Astraspids, Heterostracans, Anaspids, Galeaspids, Pituriaspids, Osteostracans, and Thelodonts. Let's take a moment to differentiate some of these major groups in Silurian fishes. First of all, let's review some basic fish vocabulary. Ostracoderm fish are essentially bottom-dwelling fish with massive bony armor. They are also often referred to as agnathans or jawless fish. Agnathans, the jawless fish that appeared discreetly in the Ordovician period, diversified. Alongside the common-shaped anaspids, we find groups with increasingly varied shapes. The dart-shaped heterostracans, the ray-like osteostracans, and the more pot-bellied telodonts. Let's start with the anapsids. And to discover this group, we're going to look at an exceptional member, Burkinia. It's a little shorter than the others, measuring around 10 centimeters or 4 inches. Like the others, however, it has neither jaws nor fins. It is also distinguished by a complex set of dorsal scales. Anapsids generally have 6 to 25 gills, but the Burkinia genus has 30. This one is a Burkinia elegans. It's probably a filter feeder. Ostracoderms are, so to speak, the most advanced of the agnathans. Although they still have a long way to go, these fish are increasingly well adapted to their environment and equipped to defend themselves against predators. Among the members of the anapsids, the anaspid Pharyngolepis oblongus stands out. It has no facial shield, but a rather elongated shape with a well-developed anal fin. It measures between 10 and 25 centimeters, 4 and 10 feet. Among the telodonts, we could go and meet the telodont Loganelia scotica, an agnathus measuring around 25 centimeters or 10 feet. It has no scales but plate armor. We can see that it's more paunchy and quite different morphologically from the anapsids, despite their few similarities. Another genus stands out from the others, the heterostracans. Heterostracans have an anterior dermal shield and scales on their body and tail. As you can see, the front of these fish is very pronounced. They are shaped like arrows or horseshoes at the front. Heterostracans are agnathic vertebrates. They can be recognized by their single-bone facial shield. This is known as the anterior dermal shield. This no longer grows once the animal reaches adulthood. Another distinctive feature is their flattened body, with a mouth on top of the head and scales covering the body and tail. Their closest relatives today are hagfish. One of the Silurian specimens is the Pteraspis. This fish has a double shield of dorsal and ventral plates. It also has a rostrum, an elongated appendage that some animals, both vertebrates and invertebrates, can have, such as the saw shark. Although it doesn't really have fins as such, the Pteraspis has a lobed tail, a carapace, and a rostrum that make it very aerodynamic underwater. And then, if you look a little closer, you'll notice that its carapace has a few wing-like protuberances on the sides, which also enable it to compete with the best Silurian swimmers. The spine you see on the back of its carapace isn't very useful for swimming, but it was undoubtedly very useful for warding off predators. Pteraspis' favorite food is plankton. It therefore lived on the surface rather than in the depths. During the Silurian period, there were several species of Pteraspis, including Pteraspis croci and Pteraspis rostrata. One fish bears a close resemblance to Pteraspis, a close cousin, so to speak. It's the Rhinopteraspis dunensis. You'll notice that, like it has a carapace, a rostrum, and defensive spines on its back. Both measure between 20 and 30 centimeters. Earlier, we also mentioned galeaspids. These fish also belong to the agnathan group. They are primitive fish that had neither fins nor jaws. One member of the genus is called shuyu, geological. Here is another member of the group, Laxaspis. The distinctive head armor is still recognizable. Our little sojourn with the agnathans is drawing to a close, but our journey with the fishes is not over yet. Indeed, the evolution of these fish is not the only great revolution concerning them. One of the great events of the Silurian period was the arrival of jawed fish, the gnathostomes. Their jaws were formed from the second branchial arch of agnathans. The first jawed vertebrates, or gnathostomes, were the spiny-finned acanthodians and the placoderms, which enclosed the front of their bodies in a bony carapace. The acanthodonian, Climatius reticulatus, was one of the first jawed vertebrates. It is easily distinguished by the small ventral spines that support its fin. Acanthodians are evolutionarily unusual in that they combine the characteristics of bony fish, osteichthyans, and cartilaginous fish, chondrichthyans. During the Ordovician period, the oceans were populated by so-called ostracoderms, armored fish with a dermal bone armor. As we have seen, these fish also belong to the agnathans. They were still widely present in the Silurian, but at the end of the Ordovician and beginning of the Silurian, the arrival of placoderm fish, and above all, gnathostome fish, i.e. fish with jaws, completely overturned the marine world. But don't make any wrong assumptions. Jaws do not necessarily mean teeth. The placoderm fish group has undergone two major revolutions. Unlike ostracoderms, they had an articulated armor, mainly on the front of the body, composed of plates reminiscent of turtle shells. The other strong point of these fish is, of course, their jaws. Their jaws end in bony outgrowths. This type of jaw can also be seen in modern turtles. We'll have to wait a little longer to see real teeth in fish. Nevertheless, this primitive jaw remains powerful and perfectly suited to the task of predation. What's more, even if the teeth haven't fully erupted yet, we can see bony outgrowths that are undoubtedly the first signs of this biological evolution. Placoderms are referred to as gnathal plates rather than teeth, with the upper, supraognathal plate resting on the lower, infraognathal jawbone. This set of plates with their occlusal zones acted like scissors. This is particularly true of the fish we're looking at here, Entelognathus primordialis. It has several fins, a long tail, and a very distinctive face. It's the first to display what resembles a face, with its distinctive position of eyes, nose, and mouth. When you observe an ostracoderm, such as the anaspid, Pharyngolepis oblongus, and a placoderm such as Entelognathus primordialis, you'll notice that there are several other very distinct differences between these two groups of fish. Firstly, the placoderm's armor is no longer only on the head, but all along the body. Scales are also clearly visible. Morphologically, the most striking feature is undoubtedly the presence of fins. These fish have real limbs expressly designed for swimming. This group is therefore undergoing a major evolutionary process. With the appearance of fins, placoderm fish are able to move more precisely, swimming better and faster. Its carapace protects it from other marine animals, and above all, it acquires a powerful jaw, capable of defeating its prey, making it a good marine predator. To conclude on the hatching of the gnathostomes, it should be noted that this group gave rise sometime later to two major groups that we still know today: the cartilaginous fishes and the bony fishes. The analysis of an Entelognathus primordialis fossil turned all our beliefs and knowledge about fish classes and evolutionary theories on their head. Until the discovery of Entelognathus, it was considered that the placoderm skeleton had nothing to do with that of bony fish, and that the two had appeared separately. It was therefore thought that cartilaginous fish, similar to rays and sharks, had given rise to bony fish. But Entelognathus has small cranial bones and jaw bones. Placoderms are therefore the direct ancestors of modern fish. Vertebrates were undoubtedly endowed with a bony skeleton from the start. Indeed, the external dermal bones they possess are similar to those of osteichthyans, so they probably have the same origin. This means that the evolutionary position of sharks has changed dramatically. This revelation refines our knowledge of a whole area of paleobiology. Fossils still have much to teach us. Discoveries such as these shed a little more light on our distant past. Let's leave placoderms for a completely different kind of fish. Even if they don't belong to the gnathostomes per se, it would be interesting to meet some conodonts. These very special fish certainly have a lot to teach us and help us discover. The genus Wormelia, for example, particularly Wormelia inflata, was present in the oceans of the Paleozoic era. These animals are rather difficult to describe and rather unusual, even frightening despite their small size. They don't have jaws, yet they have small teeth. It may seem paradoxical, but they're not the only animals to have teeth but no jaws. This is the case of hagfish and lampreys, for example. hagfish are necrophagous and lampreys parasitic. A 2012 study published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B sheds some light on this animal, which is certainly a vertebrate, and its mode of nutrition, since it possessed a rather original teething system. According to the study, the scientists, a group of British and Australians, were able to uncover, through tooth wear, the workings of their distinctive dentition. Teeth functioned in pairs, one opposite the other, exerting rotational movements to crush food. Finally, the absence of jaws prevented these fish from exerting strong pressure, but they managed to compensate for the problem with very sharp teeth. After all these marine encounters, we can affirm that even if the Silurian is a short period, it was marked by numerous events and major biological evolutions in the marine world. Marine biodiversity developed and enriched considerably during the Silurian. But what about on land? Terrestrial life is limited to a narrow band of wetlands around rivers and lagoons, but even if it's still limited, it's there. Both fragile and firmly rooted in the soil, it is determined to conquer dry land. But as you can imagine, it didn't all happen in a day. It took several million years to reach the narrow, wet, life-rich Silurian strip of land. After the evolutionary radiation of the Cambrian, also known as the Cambrian explosion, so important was the development of life, and after the Ordovician radiation, which was also very rich and important, the arrival of the first arthropods on Earth is without doubt the most important revolution in the history of life on Earth. It is symbolic. It marks the beginning of all possibilities. Plants were the first to colonize terra firma, as early as the Ordovician period, 470 million years ago, fundamentally altering the geosphere. Oxygenation of the atmosphere, formation of soils, and new climatic and sedimentary regimes. Until then, however, plants were virtually alone in the world. However, mycorrhizae, symbiotic associations between plant roots and soil fungi, not only give plants better access to soil nutrients, but also help to weather the rock. In other words, together they pave the way for a biotope worthy of the name. When arthropods finally land on the continent, they bring with them the very first terrestrial ecosystem. Arthropods were the first animals to take the plunge, along with myriapods and arachnids in the Silurian 430 million years ago. They opened the door to the hexapods, the insects, which in turn landed on land at the beginning of the Devonian, as well as to other animals straight out of the water. In all, 7 arthropod groups independently reached land: myriapods, arachnids, hexapods, and at least 4 crustacean groups, including sobugs and crabs. Vertebrates were therefore the last to colonize continental environments, only at the end of the Devonian. In fact, vertebrates could not have left the water as quickly as arthropods, for the simple reason that the latter were better equipped to cope with the many anatomical and physiological problems of life on land. Arthropods will play an essential role in soil development and the decomposition and recycling of nutrients. To better understand this very first ecosystem, let's go back a few million years to observe the beginnings of the very first plant cover. The oldest fossils of land plants date back to the beginning of the Middle Ordovician period, some 470 million years ago. We're going to find part of the fossil of these first plants, their spores. While the lack of complete fossils limits our knowledge of these early plants, it does enable us to date their appearance. A little later in the Silurian, we began to find fossils of a different kind. This time we can analyze fossil remains of plant stems and roots from around 430 million years ago. These fossils include the first vascular plants, also known as tracheophytes, which transport water and mineral salts throughout the plant. Vascular plants, which produce more acids than algae or lichens and have a much more developed root system, offer a larger contact surface. It is therefore highly likely that they have intensified alteration of the substrate, i.e., the soil in which they grow. With these first plants, the Earth was able to welcome its new inhabitants. Numerous morphological and physiological transformations were required in both plants and animals before living organisms could adapt to life on land. While the aquatic world is not always the most peaceful, life on the surface is harsh and much more unstable. Arthropods, thanks to their rigid shells, have been able to overcome the first difficulty posed by atmospheric pressure on a body, a difficulty that until now was not so problematic since the organisms lived in water. Another problem faced by the Earth's first settlers was reproduction out of water. In the early days, animals living on land still reproduced in an aquatic environment. It wasn't until a few further evolutions, and above all major biological revolutions such as the amniotic egg, that this obstacle was overcome. But we're not there yet. Far from it. Plants first tried to conquer new territories, gradually establishing themselves on the continent during the Silurian period. In previous eras, green algae, cyanobacteria, and lichens had gradually settled on land. Until then, only lichen had managed to make a real place for itself. But in the early Silurian, moss also managed to establish itself. Despite the light presence of this vegetation on the Earth's surface, the landscape remains close to desolation. It's a far cry from a lush forest. However, something is about to change during the Silurian period. Water brought sediments to the coasts, and these sediments were a godsend for certain plants that could cling to the ground while taking advantage of the nearby water. This is how Cooksonia hatches, a plant with a stem and a kind of ball at its tip. Its average height is 10 centimeters or 4 feet. But this height is enough for Cooksonia to spread its spores through the air and reproduce. Soon, Cooksonia is carpeting coastal landscapes. Cooksonia thrives but still encounters some adaptation difficulties. Until now, plants didn't have to withstand atmospheric pressure, or at least, through water, they could withstand it much more easily. In the course of evolution, they adopted a new skeleton, better suited to life on land. During the Middle Silurian, another major evolution took place in these plants. They were equipped with stomata, small orifices that enabled them to breathe through the air. In this way, plants will acquire new abilities to adapt to their new environment. In water, nutrients were more readily available. On land, they are faced with rock. To overcome this problem, they acquire rhizomes. These are the beginnings, so to speak, of roots. Thanks to these, they can absorb nutrients from the soil, and above all, redistribute them, even to the plant's highest organs. It was not until a few million years later that plants completed their panoply with outgrowths. These will enable them to capture more of the sun's rays and thus grow. For each plant to succeed, it sometimes had to climb much higher than the others. At that time, ferns were much larger than those we know today, for example. Even if vegetation was still very limited in the Silurian, it still helped new species to flourish. On land, there are indeed some plant species, but also animals that are just beginning their journey on Earth. In the Silurian, vegetation was still in its infancy, but this was enough for myriapods and arachnids such as mites, spiders, and scorpions to adapt to a terrestrial environment. Arachnids form a class of animals that is often confused with and limited to spiders. Although spiders are indeed part of this class, they are not the only members. This class also includes scorpions, mites, ticks, and opilions. What distinguishes this group is that its members have 4 pairs of legs, neither wings nor antennae, and their ocelli, or eyes, are simple rather than compound, as in dragonflies, for example. Arachnids are also arthropods, i.e. they have a segmented body, and are more specifically chelicerae arthropods. They have chelicerae. These chelicerae are appendages close to the mouth that end in hooks or pincers. If you've been paying attention during our trip, this description probably reminds you of our famous Eurypterids. You're quite right to make the connection, as they are both chelicerae arthropods. The arachnid order is included in the class of these chelicerae arthropods. Eurypterids are also included, as they too have mouth-like appendages that end in hooks or pincers. Unlike our first encounter with Eurypterids, this time we're not looking for members of these chelicerae arthropods in the water, but on land. With the help of vegetation, spiders, scorpions, and even myriapods have managed to make a little space for themselves. As you probably know by now, the first clawed arthropods of the chelicerae suborder appeared around 540 million years ago, during the Cambrian, the oldest period of the Paleozoic era. Most adapted to life on land. But during the Silurian period, the first scorpions and spiders settled on the continent, or at least left a trace of their passage on Earth. Yes, let's not forget that distant history is a very special science. Scientists rely on current knowledge, technology, and of course, first and foremost, on fossils. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to find remnants of the distant past. Based on analysis of the elements currently in our possession, it appears that the first scorpions and spiders on the continent date back to the Silurian. However, future discoveries may update or refine this information. Among Silurian arachnids, the scorpion genus and the spider genus in particular are found on Earth. Earlier, we met a sea scorpion. This time it's a land scorpion, Paleophonus. The scorpion is about 7 centimeters long. Yes, larger plants in newly enriched soils are enriching biodiversity. We can see spiders, scorpions, and myriapods. Paleophonus, our scorpion, has a way of life that still raises questions. He lived on Earth, that's a fact. At least that's what the fossil evidence suggests. Now, whether it was exclusively terrestrial, mainly aquatic and on dry land at times, or aquatic in its juvenile form and then terrestrial as an adult, the question remains unanswered. The sting at the end of its tail, also called telson, is undoubtedly venomous, unlike the eurypterids we've seen. In the spider, there are clear similarities and differences with the scorpion. In the scorpion, the abdomen extends into a postabdomen called the tail. In the spider, the body is composed of two parts, but the head and thorax are combined into a single part, called the cephalothorax. The second part is the abdomen. It is on the cephalothorax that we find the 4 pairs of locomotive legs and the chelicerae. While the finest fossil specimens date from the Devonian, Paleocorinus rhinensis lived on Earth at the end of the Silurian. It belongs to the order Triganotarbida. Spiders of the order Triganotarbidae do not yet have silk-producing spinnerets, unlike the majority of predatory spiders today. Examples include Cryptomartus brebski, Pneumodesmus also lived on Earth at the same time. This time we're dealing with a myriapod. It is undoubtedly the first of this group to take its first steps on the continent. This ancestor of millipedes marks an important stage in the conquest of the terrestrial environment by arthropods, as it is the oldest terrestrial animal discovered to exhibit typical air breathing. The opening of the trachea is visible on the fossil segments found, suggesting a terrestrial life. It would then be necessary to wait patiently for biological evolution to continue before other organisms manage to live on the continent. To conclude our journey into the Silurian, it's worth remembering that this was a transitional period between the Ordovician and Devonian eras. It was a period when plants and certain arthropods finally succeeded in conquering the land, but also when primitive fish made their grand entrance among aquatic animals. Primitive fish that would later give rise to a major revolution in the world of life. The Acanthodians gave rise to the Osteichthyans or bony fish, which in turn gave rise to the Sarcopterygians. These in turn gave rise to the Crossopterygians. All these groups may not mean much to you, as they're pretty hard names to remember, but you should know that during the Devonian period, the Crossopterygians gave rise to the first tetrapods, which you may be more familiar with, since this large group includes, for example, dinosaurs and birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. But that's another period, another story, another journey through time.